domestic violence, or violence in the household, and child abuse. Um, it was in our house at the level of torture. And when I say torture, I'm not exaggerating. I can tell you that as a child, I was beaten, I was tied up, I was locked in closets, I was hammered, I was burned. Just to name a few of the things my father did. Of course, he was also doing this to my mother from the, like I said, my earliest memory, and to all of our siblings, and even included our pets, our dogs. So, that was, you have to remember, because of my age, I grew up in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and there were no hotlines for women to call in the United States. There were no domestic violence shelters that my mother could have
Mhm.
run to. She didn't speak English very well, and so she couldn't really defend herself verbally. And so we were left to fend for ourselves, and including with the police coming to the house. Remember, all the police officers back then were all men. And the last time the police came to our house, the officer leaned into my father and he said, "You need to keep your woman in line." That's the last thing I heard. So that's sort of life in my house until I decided to take a different stance. But my father got away with it because I'm the spit image of my father. So he was this friendly, handsome, charming guy,
Mhm.
and had a high security job at an aerospace industry. Everybody thought he was a great man outside the house. Inside our house lived the monster.
Mm.
And then we can get into this, as we can discuss. But I'm sure there was some mental illness involved and some other issues. But
Yes.
that was where we were at that time, and also where the United States, and I think even globally, the issue of violence against
Yes,
women
of
was
course.
was underreported, and also at a time where, depending on your culture, the man was considered the king of the house, and he had a right to do whatever he wanted, including, abusing his wife.
Exactly. When you look back at your younger self, do you feel like you became the person you wanted to be or the person you had to become in order to survive?
Great question. So I think that if we, like people say, well, if it could, anything could change if your life, you could go back to your life. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, and my experiences made me the human being that I am, but also the man that I am. And so there's really nothing that I would have changed, that I could have changed, other than the fact that um, as a parent today. I just can't imagine how you could ever do that kind of damage, to your own child. Your partner, your spouse is, that's not excusable either, but to your child, I don't understand, how that's possible. So I think I am who I am because of my experiences, and I think part of that is, we all deal with this issue in
Mm.
different ways. Some become paralyzed in fear
Yes,
and try
yes.
to stay out of the way. Some go into denial, meaning that,
Mhm.
they bury the memory, and that memory may come out at the, the most inappropriate times, maybe even in an intimate situation
Mhm.
with a partner, and they buried it for years. And then the others, they become confrontational and full of rage. I was the latter case. I was the kid that confronted my father, who got angry, and probably could have been the most like him, because I had that anger.
Mm.
But the one thing I know, and I'm not really big on astrology, but I'm a Libra, and Libras are always we're always seeking justice. And
Mm.
I think that was my job, was to seek justice in that household and see how we could change that, including I went to the police station myself at 12 years old,
Tell me
and
about that incident.
I got naked in front of a room full of officers at 12. This was after the police left our house and said, "Keep your woman in line."
Mhm.
And so I stood in front of the officers, and I had bruises, welts, burns on my body, because he made sure not to hit us where on our bodies,
Mhm.
where that we're
Yeah.
not covered up by clothing. So they were horrified at what they saw, and I told the officers, I said, "Now go to my house and arrest them and get them out of there for good." And the police said what they could do was, I'm 12 years old now. They said, "You can sign a formal complaint We'll put you in the police car, take you back to the house, and we'll talk to your father." And I said, "You don't understand. If I do that and you don't arrest him when you leave, he's going to kill me." And they said there's nothing more that they could do, that it was a private family matter. And that is the title of my memoir. It's the
So
title
here.
of my book. And you know this because I think you read the book. But the end of that story was at 12 years old, I sat my mom and my older brother down at the kitchen table, and I said, "If I get a gun
Mhm.
and I shoot him, will you back me up?" And they didn't say yes, but their eyes did. So I went out in my neighborhood looking for a gun. And back then, and in those neighborhoods, and in that particular time in our country, guns were a lot harder to come by than they are today.
Mhm.
So I'm thankful to God, whoever our higher power is, that He had a better plan for me. So I didn't do that, but ultimately, my father kidnapped us from Los Angeles, California. He took my mom, pregnant. We didn't know she was pregnant, to a motel, left her outside of town, and then took the rest of her children from Los Angeles to Miami, Florida. And my mom, it took her several days to get back to the house. And when she did, it turned out that she arrived, and everyone, everything in the house and everyone in the house had vanished without a trace. She didn't know where we were. So that's the other part of the story, is that we actually got kidnapped, and I ended up in Miami. And it took my mom many months to figure out where we were, have my baby sister, Carmen, and move to Miami herself. And she was granted a divorce back then, but because my father earned more money than
Mhm.
my than her, he got to keep all the children living with him. So it didn't change anything. So,
It's unbelievable,
yeah.
Victor.
So
Wh-
so
When
yeah,
you
so go ahead.
when you think of your mother today, what do you feel first? Love, pain, admiration, or something more complicated?
That's a great question. So my mother passed away many, many years ago, but at the age of 84, she lived a long life, and whatever. And so I've been asked over the years, like, who are some of your heroes in
Mm.
your life? And I put my mom at the top of that list, because as a parent, I can't imagine what my mother had to endure and witness being done to her children, with her only remedy was, again, to kill him, to stop it. And at that particular time in our country, we didn't have the kind of legislation and rules and protective services that we have today. So my mom was a hero, but I also want to tell you there were 6 kids in my family.
Mm.
I have one brother who didn't survive. He passed away at the age of 9. And but there's 3 boys, and the siblings are 3 boys, two girls. And I can tell you probably the most amazing thing is that out of the 5 surviving children, and especially the men in our family, we have all broken the cycle of violence. And so, to me, that tells me that somehow, in my mother's very quiet, humble, and dignified way, she was able to instill a sense of goodness and resilience in her children, because we've all managed to break the cycle of violence, which is rare for a family like ours.
It is. It is. Victor, tell me about that story when your mother collapsed and was taken to hospital, and she was too afraid to even say her name.
Yeah. So this was about that time when things were at the worst. I was around 12, 13 years old. I know I was in junior high, and my my um, my mother, we didn't have a laundry machine, dryer in our house.
Hmm.
So my mom would have to go with a cart, behind her, dragging a cart with all the pile of clothes for all these kids and, husband and whatever, to the laundromat to do the laundry. But during that time, my father had invented a new way to hit her, and he had a steel handled hairbrush, and he would hit her across right dead center in where her heart is. And eventually, it turned out that her heart was completely swollen. So on the way to the laundromat, she collapsed on the street, and they rushed her to a hospital where the doctors told her, "You're in God's hands." But my mother stayed in that hospital. It's a term here in the United States we use when you don't have a name. They call you a Jane Doe. My mother stayed in that hospital as a Jane Doe for 2 weeks because she was too afraid to give her real name, for fear that my father would come and find her at the hospital. So it turned out that one of my um, you know classmates, who my mom was good friends with, came to me and said, your mom is in the hospital. That's where she's at." I thought he had killed her, or I didn't know what happened to her. I didn't think she had run away. And so I went to visit her at the hospital until my father found out. And then, I was, of course, punished severely, both mentally and physically for that. But my mother and I had kind of a secret pact. I always tried to protect her in whatever way I could, and and she always tried to do the same for us in whatever way she could. But again, she was overwhelmed by the physical size. I think a woman is my equal in every way. But in most cases, I can dominate a woman physically.
Mhm,
I'm a big man. I'm over 6'2". I played
yes.
college and professional football, so I'm a big guy. There are some women that could probably, because they have some martial arts skills or whatever. But as a whole, most men can dominate a woman physically,
Mhm, mhm,
and so that's always been my. I always thought it was wrong from the moment I saw it the first time, and so in my life, that's always been something that I strive to be a man, and I'm as macho as you get. But part of what makes me a masculine man is that I will stand up to respect and protect women, and that I will show my emotions,
mhm,
because that's another thing we tell our boys not to do. So you have a bunch of
yes.
boys that were sitting on it, and eventually it's when it does come out, it usually comes out in violence.
Mm,
So, interestingly, as an actor, I have played a lot of, like, especially when I was younger, I played a lot of violent individuals on
mhm,
screen. And I did one movie that has this crazy cult following around the world called Blood In, Blood Out, and I play a convict, and people actually tattoo my image on their body all over the world. It's just the
yes.
strangest thing. But we were actually in San Quentin, which is a notorious prison here in California.
Mhm,
That's where we filmed with the all the inmates around us are the real inmates of San Quentin in the movie. And I walked around that prison, and my character's name was Magic Mike. So I'm like
mhm.
the original Magic Mike, but he doesn't dance. And but I walked around that prison, and I went there, but for the grace of God, because that's exactly where I was heading.
Mm,
Because I eventually I joined a street gang when I was a kid because I was so angry and violent, and that's violence is all I knew. And but the part of the story that I'm sure we're going to get to is that we've
mhm.
all heard the African saying that it takes a village to raise a child. Well, I'm that child. And there's another African saying that we don't, it's not as popular, but it comes from the Maasai tribe in
Mhm, mhm.
Africa. And they ask the question, how are the children? And they feel that this is a way to gauge the health of the community. If the children are well, then so too is the rest of the tribe. And so that's the back end of my story is, how do we heal, and um, how do we transform? So,
Yeah, now that you said that word transform, how were you able to transform your anger over the years? Did you learn, to transform it, or did you learn to live with it?
so that's a great question. So the way that my relationship with my father ended was I was 15 and a half. That's after he had already kidnapped us. We were now in Miami. My mother had just moved to Miami, but you know she couldn't have us.
Mhm,
And so my father was about to beat one of my siblings for something really, like, stupid, and you would never do that to a child. And in defending my brother, I ended up fighting my father physically. It was the first time I ever confronted him,
mm,
and I was bigger than he was, and I won the fight that night. And so the minute he left the house, I grabbed my bag, little grocery bag with some of my stuff in it, and I ran away from home. And I lived on the streets for several days, terrified that the police, my father, somebody was going to find me. And one of my high school classmates found me on the street and said, everyone's looking for you, the police, the school, and of course your father. And I broke down, finally, and I was, I'd been living on the streets. I was hungry and scared, and I just said, and remember, I'm 15, I'm 6'2", and over 200 pounds. I'm the size of a man. And And I just told him what happened, and he took me home to his father. And I like to say that there's angels in my life that showed up.
Mm.
Well, his father happened to be one of those angels. He was also a lawyer. So we took my father to court, and they gave me what was basically a restraining order back then. And so
Mhm.
it was unheard of for a 15-year-old child back in the 70s to take, but so I got my freedom. The only difference in today's world is in today's environment here in the United States, they would have taken all the children away from him. I got my freedom. My siblings did not. So I ended up, my high school took me in. I was a gang member, but I was also a very good athlete. I
Mm.
played baseball, but when I got to high school, I discovered football, American football. And, um, and I realized that it gave me a healthy outlet for my rage. I was so angry and I could put a helmet on and the shoulder pad just like everybody else
Mhm.
and I could go after people. And my teammates actually nicknamed me, my nickname was the Mad Cuban because they said when I put a helmet on, they could see my eyes would change. And
Yeah.
I was, kind of dangerous on the field. But the beauty of the game is that it gave me this healthy outlet for my rage and what had happened to me as a child. But it also ended up paying for my education in college because I was such a good athlete. I was able to go to college on a full scholarship, which I wouldn't have been able to do. But in high school, I lived with 7 families and unofficial foster child. There was no paperwork. They just took me in. And then the very last family that took me in was another Cuban family and their son became an actor. Nobody could say Echevarria in Hollywood, so he changed his name to Stephen Bauer. So if you've ever seen the movie Scarface, he was Pacino's handsome partner, Manny Manolo, who's in the whole film with Pacino.
Mhm.
That's like my foster brother. His family took me in, and that's where I lived all through college. And I'm still a member of that family today. So that's part of my transformation is having a healthy outlet, whatever it is, whether it's music, dance, poetry, writing, whatever it is. And in this country, when they're
Mhm.
cutting our budgets, the first thing they take away from our kids are the free music, dance, sports, the things that gave me a chance to feel like a winner and maybe a champion when I wasn't getting that message at home. And so that's so important. So I advocate for making sure that we have the budgets for those programs because in our country we seem to have billions of dollars to build more and more prisons every year
Yes.
and most
Yes.
of the prisons are filled with black and brown kids, and I'm Latino, so I would be, even though I'm very light skinned, I'm a Latino, and so I was heading that way. So
Mm.
that's what the village can do. That's why I say I'm the child that the village raised.